I think we should cool it with the R5 because it's hot. Like it overheats. Okay, so first of all, before any haters start hating and think that I'm hating on the Canon R5 just because I don't like Canon, I don't use Canon, that's not the case. I don't really give a shit about camera brands. I don't have any sort of personal attachment to any brand. I don't care. I like Canon. I've shot a lot of stuff, handful of projects on both the C100 Mark II and the C300 Mark II. Those are both amazing cameras. As for the R5 itself, I think that what Canon has done with that camera is absolutely amazing. They've just laid it all out there and said, here's the camera, here's what it can do, use it as much as you want up to the capabilities of the camera, the physical capabilities and constraints of the camera. So that's really what I wanted to talk about here, is just the constraints that we have with a small camera, a small mirrorless camera that's, as far as I can tell, about the size of a GH5, and internal 8K recording and internal full frame 4K 60 and 4K full frame 120 recording. So the limitations of that are essentially heat buildup and the lack of ability to deal with that heat internally. So what's going to happen is after 20 minutes the camera is going to shut off, because at 8K in both raw and compressed, because it just can't deal with the heat. So in order to avoid overheating, it's going to shut off. If and when the camera does overheat, you have to shut it off in order for the temperature inside to come back down to a reasonable level, and then you can start recording again. However, since it's already sort of reached a sort of heat saturation, it's going to reach like an overheating state much more quickly. Canon's internal testing says that as short as maybe 3 minutes, it's going to overheat again or have to shut off again before it overheats. So, and this all comes from apparently Canon's own internal testing and documentation that's been released to certain organizations like CVP, and I can link all that to you and you can see it. Essentially, we're looking at a maximum record time in 8K, whether that's raw or compressed, of 20 minutes. And that's in a very kind of controlled 74-degree room temperature type environment. So if you're outdoors in the summertime, where I live, it's in the mid-90s every day right now. I would imagine that that maximum record time is going to be reduced significantly in hot environments. In 4K 60, Canon says you're going to be limited to around 35 minutes, which I have no problem with. I think people who record at 4K 60 for real time are stupid because it looks dumb. And you know, for doing slow motion, you don't typically have to shoot for more than a handful of seconds or a couple minutes at a time in order to find the moment that you want. And then 4K 120, I don't even know if they did one, because once again, you shouldn't be recording for long periods of time at 120 frames per second unless you're Ang Lee or something. For me, if you were looking at this camera as going to be as a professional camera and you were eyeballing the 8K internal recording as something that you would use in a professional environment, I don't think that's possible anymore in like 95% of situations. So for live events, it's pretty much done deal, because you have to be able to record at any given moment, and if your camera's overheated and you have it shut off, you clearly cannot record at any given moment. Long form interviews, again, unless your long form interview is less than 20 minutes, in which case it's probably not a long form interview anymore, your 8K recording is not going to be viable. And then for scripted content, this one is maybe a little bit more up in the air, because a lot of times for scripted formats, whether that's TV or film or whatever, a lot of times takes are a matter of seconds, or at the longest maybe a few minutes. So you would think you'd be okay in that situation, and you might be. However, you're probably going to want to have the camera running, if not not recording, but at least on, in which case it's not dissipating heat as much as it would be as if it were off, because it's still, doing stuff. It's still powering the monitors, still powering the EVF. All those things are still building heat, so it's never going to come back down in temperature to the degree that it would if it were off. And given that these environments typically have a lot of people around, a lot of lights, they're probably going to be hot. So I don't know, I just think that, even in those situations, even if you're not recording continuously for more than a few minutes at a time, you still have the potential of building up too much heat and then having to shut the camera off. And in those situations where time is money, and a lot of money and time is at stake, the production is not going to want to sit around and wait for the camera to cool off. And then there's also just the uncertainty of how long it's going to be able to record again. So I think even in those situations, it's not necessarily a viable camera. So in my opinion, the 8K mode in this camera is definitely supplementary to the more reasonable conservative 4K modes. I think for the vast majority of time, people are going to be shooting this camera in 4K, and if they want the added resolution, it's only going to be in short, more controlled bursts, if you will, which is totally fine, because look at what you get in this camera. Even in 4K, you're getting an 8K image downsampled to 4K, so you're getting tons of detail, tons of information, and you're still getting 10-bit 422 internal. And up until the Panasonic S1H, that was something that, you know, we didn't have. I still think it is an amazing camera, but we have to be reasonable about what the actual limitations of it are. And I feel like anybody who was, you know, being reasonable, being rational about what this camera was going to be, probably knew that this was coming, because there's just really no way to deal with heat unless Canon was willing to make a bigger camera with active cooling like Panasonic did with the S1H. But that's not the direction that Canon wanted to go. They wanted to keep it small, they wanted to keep it light, they wanted to reduce complexity, all those things, I'm sure. And I'm also sure that not wanting to cannibalize their bigger, more expensive cinema cameras had to be a consideration, because, I mean, when you're looking at just raw capability of 8K, like, none of their other bigger cameras do that. So this is like an amazing camera, and it had to have some sort of limitation. Otherwise, I feel like a lot of people would forego those bigger, more professional cameras, at least in terms of video, for this EOS R5. I hope you found that useful, hope you found it helpful. I'm not hating on the camera. Once again, I think it's amazing. Even for just 4K, kind of look at, you know, the GH5S and like, man, Micro Four Thirds, they need to really step up in their next round of cameras in order to just remain viable, because full frame is really catching up with what Micro Four Thirds, you know, the advantages that Micro Four Thirds had are really kind of eroding. So exciting times. Can't wait to see what Sony has coming up with whatever it is, A7S III. It's definitely not going to be 8K, but I think it's going to be interesting. So anyway, hope you found this helpful, useful, entertaining in some way. Feel free to like, feel free to dislike if you disliked it, and feel free to subscribe, maybe. Alright, cool. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.